Welcome. Um, it's such an auspicious day that we gather today because on Thursday, December 4th, marked the 50th anniversary of Hannah Arendt's death. And it is a fitting tribute to her life and her life's work that we gather together today for Kaffee und Kuchen. So, I'd like to start by saying the opinions expressed here today are my own and do not reflect those of NPAP. Dreams have long been a source of amazement, amusement, and information. Freud in 1900 in The Interpretation of Dreams gives us the royal road to the unconscious, for the individual through free association to the idiosyncratic images in their dreams, and to a model of dream creation. That book elucidates that there might be an internal censor that finds something, a thought, a wish, so unthinkable that the wish has to be disguised. And Freud conceptualizes in this book 3 types of dreams: wish fulfillment, nightmares, and what I would call a neurotic dream. So those are of a conflicted dreamer, one who desires and who fears the realization of their innermost longings. Charlotte Berart in 1966, in the book The Third Reich of Dreams, Nightmares of a Nation, gives us a 4th type of dream, the social dream. Forged under totalitarianism, these dreams speak to what is societally unspeakable at the time, and possibly to a larger audience than just the dreamer. They give us a glimpse into the psychological effects of living under a coercive government, and her book offers some directions on how to ameliorate their effects. So I'd like to start with some definitions, and I apologize. I'd like to start with some definitions. Totalitarianism, relating to a system of government that is centralized and dictatorial, and that requires complete subservience to the state. Inverted totalitarianism, which I just learned about, is a theoretical system where economic powers like corporations exert subtle but substantial power over a system that superficially seems democratic. Over time, this theory predicts a sense of powerlessness and political apathy, continuing a slide away from political egalitarianism. And that's a theory formulated by Sheldon Wolin. And lastly, the definition of fascism: a political philosophy, movement or regime that exalts nation and often race above the individual, and that stands for a centralized autocratic government headed by a dictatorial leader, severe economic and social regimentation, and forcible suppression of opposition. And this is, I think, the key to our understanding of dreams under fascism, is that our bodies are on the line. There is an existential threat, and that makes it harder to think clearly, because our first goal is self-preservation. So signs of totalitarianism. Are, and this is from the Foundation for Economic Education, dissent is seen as violence. Media is manipulated. The legal system is overtaken by the state. Dissent is repressed. State police protect the government, not the people. Rights are abridged and contingent on compliance. Conformity is demanded. Power is located in an elite circle of people and institutions. Violence is permitted. Propaganda against those cast as enemy of the state. Minorities are persecuted. Extra-legal actions are sanctioned against regime opponents. Harsh legal enforcement for singled-out others. Private and public instruments of power are used to enforce adherence to state dogmas. And I hope some of those might sound familiar. And what totalitarianism actually looks like. The leader insists on mass public adoration. The regime controls the truth. It suppresses knowledge producers, invents common enemies, and the leader is surrounded by sycophants and cronies. So why this topic and why now? I think I'm passionate about dreams. Even before beginning my own therapy many years ago, I was impressed by the quirkiness of my dream imagery. And in my analysis, I began to really be convinced of their power and importance as a royal road to the unconscious. And marvel at my unconsciousness's ability to use metaphor and wordplay to reveal deeper truths about my own inner conflicts. I did not want to believe in social dreams that an attempt at communicating with a larger audience than just myself and sometimes my analyst was going on. And yet they still believed in me, which is to say, that my clinical experience supports Charlotte Berard's assertions and that they do exist. I came across The Third Reich of Dreams, Nightmares of a Nation by Charlotte Berard back in 2020, and it was such a comfort. I hope today proves to be that for you as well. I learned that there was an historical precedent for the feelings I was having living under an authoritarian government, and that there is an historical precedent for confronting these feelings. In January of 2025, after the inauguration, I was demoralized, angry, and afraid. Feeling powerless, I searched for a way to be of service to our community, to bring people together, to restore our faith in one another, institutions that help regulate, guide, and secure our lives. And I had given this presentation during our current president's first term and realized now more than ever we need the lessons from the past, from the Third Reich, contained in this book. Much of what's happening in the United States has been unimaginable from my own life's experience. This informs why I'm so enthusiastic about sharing the lessons of history and amplifying the messages contained in the Third Reich of Dreams. We are not alone. History can guide us through perilous times. We are all susceptible to being silenced by totalitarian coercion. As Bettelheim says in the essay attached at the end of the book, we were all once children, completely dependent on someone who was hopefully a benign authoritarian. And some of us might want or long to be taken back to a time where we were taken care of. And some of us may unquestioningly follow orders because of these historical experiences. there are some predictable consequences to our psychological lives living under fascism, namely alienation from ourselves, from others, and from our environment, lack of enjoyment in things we formerly took pleasure in, and loss of a sense of agency or autonomy, hopelessness, and what in normal times might be considered paranoia, continuous suspicion. The fact of physical harm makes self-preservation in direct conflict with our higher values, our ideals, our, in Freud's words, ego ideal. Being a bystander of systemic injustice has deep psychological effects, which include the sense of responsibility and guilt. There are countermeasures we can take to help us think more clearly as they decrease anxiety. Today, I hope to present some countermeasures that we can continue to think clearly, antidotes include humor and ridicule, solidarity, and a couple I'll model now. I want to take a moment to cultivate gratitude by thanking the Continuing Education Committee for inviting me to speak, with a special shout out to Michael D. Simone, the new chair of the committee, for helping me to submit the proposal, and to Alice Enton for mentoring me through this process of preparing, and Claire Steinberger, who assisted with clarifying what I wanted to say and how. Also, my deep gratitude goes out to Peter Filardo, who was a real help with the history and cultural background of the Third Reich. And most of all, thank you to all of you who took the time to come here today and help us to conspire together. I would like to model setting healthy boundaries. So before we begin, I would ask, please remember we're in a public forum. If you choose to disclose clinical information, and I hope you do, please disguise the identity of your patients. I would ask that you take a moment now to turn off your cell phone or turn them to airplane mode so that our devices are not listening in on us. We are living in dangerous times, and I welcome the discussion of dream material and current events as they relate to our dreams. However, let's not traumatize one another. Being mindful to speak about the psychological turns and twists, but not the literal physiological ones of forcible suppression. As Charlotte Barrett herself modeled in the book, refraining from including graphic images of some of the more violent dreams, let's try to reduce our anxiety so we can think clearly together. I would like to model partialization. We will begin with what I hope is 30 minutes of introductory remarks, and then I hope to open up the conversation. I have approximately an hour and a half of material, and I would like to discuss, but I am setting the intention that this will be a collegial exchange of ideas and information, and that we can play with dream imagery. I would like to model breathing now. So let's all take a moment to take a deep breath in and out and acknowledge our efforts at arriving here today on a cold winter morning. I set the intention of modeling how to have fun. I hope we can play with some of the material, and I hope you can stay until the end for a treat. I want to acknowledge my vulnerability, my own tendency to self-censor, and the anxiety that just speaking my experiential truth provokes, and possibly to help create a subversive and safe space to practice speaking the unspeakable to one another. I hope we can intrepidly share our musings and some dreams, keeping in mind that courage is contagious. I set the intention that embedded in crisis is an opportunity to build a better future together, and that maybe we can begin that hard work today. There is an expression, history repeats itself. And more recently, it has been amended to say, history does not repeat itself, but sometimes it rhymes. In these days of uncertainty, caused by an authoritarian and fascist president, it seems as if history is more of a limerick. The rhyme repeats, is not funny, and is in bad taste. In the United States, our long-standing experience of the executive branch of government is that it has been held in check by the legislative and legal branches, and that the president has observed protocols of civility and propriety, and at least gave lip service to being a public servant. The government now has been debased to a profit-making enterprise for its craven titular head. The Third Reich offers this president a template for the undermining of justice, norms, and civility. Charlotte Berart's The Third Reich of Dreams offers us a glimpse into what she calls Gleichschaltung, which she defines as the process of political and social reorganization aimed at achieving and maintaining Nazi control over every aspect of life in Germany. So I like the idea of a murmuration of starlings. If you think of the patterns that a flock of birds create, they all know where and when to be, where they need to be. That's entrainment, and I like that as an image for the idea of Gleichschaltung, being entrained into mass and knowing the protocols and doing them. The process, so these dreams, which she calls social dreams, do in fact act as Freud postulates the function of a dream to be, which is to protect sleep. For the most part, but it's not a restful sleep. In fact, if anything, these social dreams seem to be a wake-up call. Charlotte Berart's journey to get the book written and published spans continents and over 3 decades. She began collecting the dreams of her neighbors in Germany approximately 3 days after Hitler came to power. She says she spoke to a dressmaker, an aunt, neighbor, milkman, and friend. She wrote the dreams down, secreting them in book bindings in her library, and later sending them on to friends in other countries for safekeeping. She finally was able to move to New York City and collect them all together again, publishing the book in 1966. And in Charlotte Berart's idea asserts parables, parodies, and paradoxes convey a more cohesive narrative than history as written might. Charlotte Berart's a great writer, and I encourage you to read the book because it is so compelling. If you'd like my email address, I can send you a PDF of the book, and feel free to reach out. I will share a social dream from a patient who began a 3-time-a-week analysis in January of this year. So the day after the inauguration, she had the following dream. I'm at a house. Maybe it's like the one I grew up in, except this one is white. There's a huge branch looming over the house, and the branch falls on the house. People die. maybe 45, maybe 47. And so that's the dream. I am not at my sharpest this particular morning because I'm upset by the results of the election. And so I struggle and I ask for associations because something's buzzing in my head about 45, 47. And she says, oh, the president was the 45th and now the 47th president. And we both get the meaning of the dream at the same time. To her, I say, people die, acknowledging, well, hoping to acknowledge and validate the horror of what we both anticipate is to come. And as in her dream, the executive branch falls on the White House, the people's house, and people die as a result. She goes on to talk about the upheavals she's experiencing at work and in her marriage. And I am the one who was clearly haunted by this dream. I'll say that there's a certain kind of clairvoyance that Charlotte Berard notes in these social dreams, and this one seems to be poignantly clairvoyant in the destruction of the White House. So why even talk about totalitarianism? Because you all are on the front lines. And the reason, the quick answer to this question is, it's not good for our mental health. When thinking about helping our own clients, I think we first have to put our selves first. So please make sure you are safe, which one of the things I do is I put my phone on airplane mode every time I see a patient. Seek out novelty. Spend time in nature or listen to music or go to a museum or concert. I think we all have to find ways to grieve. I hope you seek out support with friends, family, and in community. If you're so moved, if you feel angry, turn it into action. And privacy is self-care. Try to carve out a place for private thoughts. And that might include psychotherapy or journaling. And lastly, to amplify Ariana Presley's message, intentionally inform joy, because she calls this a necessary act of resistance. Berard points out that the dreams of those who actively resisted are unconflicted, which is to say, in my words, they sleep better at night. If you take one thing away from today, I hope it is this. Berard herself was a Jewish journalist who, before the advent of the Third Reich, was arrested. But for being Jewish. But for the most part, those who were actively singled out were the dreams of Jewish people. Those people who were actively being singled out were reserved for the last chapter in the book. So the great majority of the dreams collected were of people who were not being actively persecuted. We know from group dynamics that what happens to one happens to all. And in this way, it's important for us to acknowledge how corrosive to society and to our internal sense of worth it is to not speak up for the voiceless. She acknowledges editing out the violent dreams, and she distinguishes war dreams as being different from social dreams. And her conceptualization is that war dreams are there has a timelessness to them. But dreams under totalitarianism have a specificity that is of its time. Most of the dreams discussed today will use displacement, condensation, and days residues. Yet those dreamt under totalitarianism are forged under coercion and resonate differently than the kind of dreams Freud talked about. Barrett suggests there's a difference, and in the afterword, Bettelheim takes issue with this, with the idea that social dreams are exclusively to a larger audience, that they have, because we only get the manifest content in the book. We don't have the associations. We can't know the latent meaning. But I agree that social dreams can have latent meaning because dreams are multiply determined. Barrett proposes that the unconscious mind of dreamers are exquisitely attuned to the social surround, and that dream imagery can reveal more than can be said in words during a totalitarian regime. While certainly genetic interpretations can be inferred and can possibly be interpreted in a helpful way, I would like to discuss some current dreams that might foreshadow our own present day Gleichschaltung. Bettelheim begins the afterword with the assertion that social dreams reflect the dreamer's internal censor, with a C, is being active due to an excess of anxiety. In dreams, the censor knows, I must not dare to act on my wishes, and thereby thwarts the dreamer's psyche's efforts at emotional relief. He goes on to point out how important it is to be in touch with our feelings when the situation is not caused by natural disaster, but by human-led events, and therefore seemingly subject to human counteraction, including our own. Freud, in the interpretation of dreams, discusses traumatic dreams, which I believe share several qualities with Barrert's social dreams. They are repetitive, or can be. And the feeling in both types of dreams is overwhelming anxiety. And in both, there are times when the dreamer wakes up or wakes themselves up. The way in which a traumatic dream differs, they are intrapsychic, and Barrett suggests that social dream communicates with a larger audience. The first chapter presents the dream of a factory owner, Herr S., whose dream I'll read in a minute. Barrett points out how the dream reveals he is alienated from his environment and from himself. And here's a direct quote from the book. 3 days after Hitler's seized power in Germany, a certain Herr S., a man about 60, and the owner of a middle-sized factory, dreamt he had been crushed, even though no one had actually had a hand on him. In one short dream, he described more precisely and with greater subtlety than he ever could have while awake a phenomenon which political scientists, sociologists, and medical experts were later to define as the nature and effects on man of totalitarian rule. Here is his dream. In his own words, Goebbels was visiting my factory. He had all the workers lined up in 2 rows, facing each other. I had to stand in the middle and raise my arm in the Nazi salute. It took me half an hour to get my arm up, inch by inch. Goebbels showed neither approval nor disapproval, as he watched my struggle, as if it were a play. When I finally managed to get my arm up, he said just 5 words: "I don't want your salute," and turned and went out the door. There I stood in my own factory, arm raised, pilloried, right in the midst of my own people. I was only able to keep from collapsing by staring at his club foot as he limped out, and so I stood until I woke up. Herr S. was uptight and self-confident, an almost despotic individual. His factory, where he had employed many an old fellow social democrat for as long as 20 years, meant everything to him. His dream experience amounted to sheer psychological torture, which is how I spontaneously termed it when he related it to me some weeks after it occurred in 1933, and that's still Charlotte Berard. Today, with our greater perspective, we can see in these clear, uncannily sharp images how all the pressures brought to bear on the individual by the totalitarian regime produced alienation, isolation, loss of identity, and dislocation, terms which by now have become almost commonplace or subject to considerable myth-making. In his dream, Herr S. is forced to humiliate and debase himself in the factory with which he identifies and in front of the employees who represent his lifelong political convictions, yet to whom his attitude is paternalistic. And what he values above all in himself is his ability to command respect. This sweeps him off his self-made foundations, destroys his sense of identity, and leaves him disoriented. He feels alienated not only from all that is real in his life, but also his own character, which has lost its authenticity. And that's the end of the quote. Herr S. has this dream repeatedly. In one version, the effort of lifting my arm was so great that sweat poured down my face like tears, as if I were crying in front of Goebbels. In another version, his backbone breaks, and Berard suggests that these dreams should be seen as indicative of the atmosphere of coercion developing around him. These diaries of the night, this is a direct quote, "These diaries of the night were conceived independently of their author's conscious will. They were, so to speak, dictated to them by the dictatorship. And while these dreams employ imagery, it is an imagery whose symbols need no interpretation, and whose allegories need no explanation. At best may one decipher its code." Much like Freud says, dreams are like rebuses. But social dreams are more like political cartoons. They are accessible to a larger audience. Now I'm going to differentiate between wish fulfillment dreams and social dreams. Most dreams are lost to memory. Berard points out how many of the dreamers recalled their dreams, prefacing them recounting with, "I shall never forget this," which oftentimes people say after having a wish fulfillment dream. So this is a similarity. Here I would like to contrast Herr S.'s dream with my friend Jane, who suffers from arthritis in her knees and who can no longer run or swim because of the kicking. She dreamt earlier in the spring of 2020, so just a couple weeks into quarantine. I wake up, I run out of my house wearing sleeping clothes, run up 6th Avenue. I get to the Y on 14th Street. The door is locked, but I'm able to open the door. I walk in, I go to the pool, I jump in and throw my hands in the air. It is just so vivid. So this is a dream of pure wish fulfillment, no allegories needed, no disguise. because the wish is acceptable to the censor. It's also a dream of deprivation because of quarantine. Much like a hungry man dreams of a buffet, it tells us about the severity of his lack. We might be better attuned to, okay, so the other goal of this presentation is to help put the unspeakable into words and to be attuned to what is unspeakable. And I think part of the why it is unspeakable to tell ourselves the truth under totalitarianism is we have to protect our psyches. There's a certain cognitive dissonance Carol Tossone spoke about so beautifully about a month ago here at MPAP. The idea of, you've got to go to the grocery store. If you truly feared an ICE raid, it would be hard to leave the house. But we have to keep going. And the other is to protect our consciousness from persecution. So I'd like to open up the discussion now for your dreams, and hopefully we can talk more about the mechanisms of dream formation and aspects of our psychological health, but let's talk. So I have a dream from this summer. I got a new office in the village, and the dream is I have a new office. I'm going, this office is in like a shopping mall on the ground level. I unlock the door and walk in to the space, and I see that there are squatters. And it's my father, sister, and brother. And my sister and brother are adults. It's a mess. There's dishes, towels, bed linens everywhere. And I'm furious. My patient is coming in 15 minutes. And all I can say, I say, get out. Get out. And so I think one of my associations is to South Park, where one of the characters goes to Israel and tells Netanyahu, you stop. You just stop. And the night before I had that fantasy of going to the White House and just saying, get out. Get out. Be gone. Now, there are other parts of the dream that reflect my idiosyncratic struggles at the time. One of my patients kept coming 15 minutes early, and it started to create this kind of panic of, I'm not ready, right? So I think that's why the 15 minutes. So, second dream in the book is this idea of there are, in the Third Reich, there was bureaucratic machinery, regulations, laws, and ordinances were the most conspicuous of its realities, and the first to penetrate the dreams of its subjects. So the first year into the Third Reich, a 45-year-old doctor dreamt about a loudspeaker with a booming voice that said, according to the decree of the 17th of the month on the abolition of walls, and then all the walls in his apartment disappeared. In the day's residue, the block warden had come around to ask why he hadn't hung a flag outside his window. And all the while he was thinking, not in my four walls. So the dream highlights the wish to comply with regulations under fear of being harmed. The fear of his own autonomy and integrity being forfeited in order to do that. I think there's this aspect of in total indifference that this starts to create. Another dream of a woman, and in her words, I dreamt that the milkman, gasman, news vendor, baker, and plumber were standing around me in a circle, holding out their bills. I felt quite calm until I noticed the chimney sweep among them. And parenthetically, because of his black outfit and two S's in the word Schornsteinfeger, chimney sweep was their family term for SS, for the SS. They stood in a circle around me, like in the children's game, Schwarzkochen, holding out, which means black witch or black cook. And I don't know how that game goes. So they're holding out their bills with their arms uplifted in the familiar gesture, which I'm gonna guess is sort of like a Zig Heil, chanting, "Your guilt cannot be doubted." So I think this taking on guilt is really important, and their indifference to her plight. So the day's residue, her tailor's son had come by wearing the uniform of a stormtrooper to collect money owed to his father for work just completed. However, the convention between the two of them was that the tailor mails the invoice and then she pays it. The dreamer demanded an explanation for this weird behavior, and the young man endorsed the situation arose out of happenstance. And she said, "That's ridiculous." And she paid. Baruch points out how these seemingly trivial incidents were not so at all, going on to point out how the newly implemented block warden system functioned. The intrusions sanctioned by the party uniform, the many private accounts settled at the same time, and the individual's gradual encirclement by the nobodies who lived around them. And this idea of being guilty before proven innocent, or guilt taken on by the guiltless, deals with the barely recognizable injustices in normal behavior under ordinary conditions, which was to produce a state of mind that, despite all efforts, remains difficult to explain. And I'm taking a shot here that it's threefold. The guilt is assumed by the dreamer. The guilt is taken on by the citizen by the totalitarian projection. So an authoritarian says you are guilty. You take it on because there's an authority telling you so. They must be right. There's a certain, as we know, family systems, identification with the aggressor, that if you identify with the aggression, then it's more productive than feeling like a victim. So if you take on the aggression, then if you aren't a sociopath, you take on the guilt. And then I think there's this idea of, if you're a bystander, you do nothing. Your silence is collusion. And then you have actual guilt for an inaction. So some of it's projected, some of it is an identification with someone who's not able to feel the guilt, and the other is actual, potentially appropriate response. The dreamer feels imprisoned or lost, even surrounded by her neighbors, as their faces were expressionless. And a patient recently shared a dream of seeing a friend who was wearing a mask, so that same sort of expressionlessness. And it is disorienting to not feel like your neighbors or compatriots would step up to help. Nothing gives me pleasure anymore is the dream of a man who was about 40. He was a legal expert employed in municipal administration. And he said, at about 8 o'clock in the evening, as usual at that time of day, I was talking on the telephone with my brother, my only friend and confidant. And parenthetically, Barart adds, this appraisal of the brothers' relationship is a true one. After having taken on the precaution of praising Hitler's policies in life in the national community, I said, nothing gives me pleasure anymore. And in fact, he had said that, on the telephone earlier in the evening. The dream goes on. In the middle of the night, the telephone rang. A dull voice, corresponding to the expressionless faces we've encountered in previous dreams, said merely, "This is the monitoring office." I, meaning the dreamer, knew immediately that my crime lay in what I had said about not finding pleasure in anything anymore, and I found myself arguing my case, begging and pleading that just this one time I be forgiven. Please, just don't report anything. Just this one time. Don't pass it on. Please, just forget it. The voice remained absolutely silent and then hung up without a word, leaving me in agonizing uncertainty. And for Barart, not taking pleasure in anything is dehumanizing. She goes on to assert that uncertainty and insecurity undoubtedly are the weapons of systematic terrorization. This loss of pleasure, the dreamer came up with a bunch of what he calls Gruelmarken, which bureaucratic fairy tales, the official designation for rumors that leak out. Along with the monitoring office, he came up with the training center for the wall installation of listening devices, which you kind of get is like reflecting a higher level of reality. Another is ordinance prohibiting fraternization with aliens, and the regulation prohibiting residual bourgeois tendencies among municipal employees. So you get the sense of what preoccupies people are all these regulations, laws. And there's a whole chapter on propaganda. But again, to go back to the internal censor and the idea that to dream opens the dreamer up to exposure. And so people in a pattern started to dream dreams so that they'll not even understand themselves. Barart says, half a dozen times I came across a virtually identical experience. I dreamt it was forbidden to dream, but I did it anyway. So one of the one greengrocer dreamt, well, he was so concerned about being listened in on that at night when his family gathered around in the living room, they put a pillow over the telephone. His dream was that the pillow testified against him. Page 15 disappeared. So I think there's a sense of hopelessness that one 21-year-old student broke off her engagement to a Jewish lawyer, and in her dream she stands up to defend her ex-fiancé, and a friend says, "There's nothing one can do. There's not a thing one can do." And this seems to be like a chorus that sense of futility. I'm going to skip this one. Those who act. I think there's a sense... I'm quoting Charlotte Barart here, and I think her evidence is anecdotal. The stronger an individual's moral fiber and political backbone, the less absurd and more positive were their dreams. I'd like to point out Barart points out that there weren't a lot of dreams where the dictator was murdered. In fact, the one that she came across was from somebody living in Prague. His dream is, I'm flying over Nuremberg, I lasso Hitler, pull him right out of the party congress and drop him in the English Channel. Sometimes I fly on to England and tell the government now and then Churchill himself what has happened to Hitler and that I was the one who did it. So there's something about the idea of wish fulfillment in that dream, but also that it was safe to dream it. Under totalitarian rule, the wishes people typically sought to fulfill in their dreams were of quite a different nature. and very understandably centered on joining the ranks and being part of things, and trained. From suggestion to auto-suggestion, one man finally stated, I dreamt I was saying I don't have to say no anymore. So another set of wishes revealed by these dreams is to be desired, or to be long, and to take part in, and the dreams are kind of childlike candor. So people dream they are friends of Görings or Goebbels or Hitler. Example of one 26-year-old transit worker was, I was marching in a column of stormtroopers but wasn't in uniform. They wanted to beat me up. Along came Hitler and said, let him be. This one we want. And there's something, the wish in the dream is that there's something about this dreamer that will keep him safe. And along these lines were several erotic dreams, that the Fuhrer was a seducer. And Barak points out that seldom that this kind of wish fulfillment appeared in the dreams of full-blooded Jews, which was to say, not that they did not have the wish to belong and conform. Had they had the chance, they would naturally have behaved like any other group in German society. It was simply that the conditions under which they lived were such that not even a dream could ameliorate them. So, the last dream I'm going to share is of a Jewish person, which is from the last chapter. And it was dreamt by a lawyer in his early 50s who had professional standing. He was an assimilated Jew living in Berlin. I had gone to a concert and had reserved a seat, or at least I thought I had. However, it turned out my ticket was only an advertisement, and that someone else was sitting in my seat. Many other people were in the same situation. With heads bowed, we all slowly left the concert hall by the center aisle. While the orchestra began playing, We Have No Abiding Home Here, which is Brahms's Deutsches Requiem. So in this dream, Barak points out there's no surreal element here. And again, it's marked by acute sensitivity that leads to clairvoyance. To use Barak's last words about the dreams of the Third Reich, like all fables, they contain not only a lesson but a warning. The warning that totalitarian tendencies must be recognized before they become overt, before the guise is dropped, before people no longer may speak the word I, and must guard their tongues so that not even they understand what they say, and before we begin to actually live the life without walls. Thank you kindly for your attention. Oh, wait, no. What? I'm gonna... before... Okay, so... It is my hope that you will leave here today with feeling a bit more empowered. In a conversation leading up to the workshop with Claire Steinberger, we were discussing what we would do if a neighbor New Yorker was being kidnapped by masked men. And Claire admitted to feeling impotent. And that's my word, not hers. And I realized I had a plan for this, but I didn't have the means to execute it, so I was just as impotent. And so I'm going to leave you all with a parting gift, the one I needed to execute my plan, and it's used by lifeguards. The pun is intended. The convention in Chicago is to give 3 short whistles for witnessing the presence of a masked men in the neighborhood with unmarked cars, or 3 long whistles for alerting neighbors to unlawful activities, including kidnapping. In conclusion, being an observer of systemic injustice has profound psychological effects. If you or your clients are suffering from feeling alienated, isolated, like they have lost their identity or been dislocated in familiar surroundings, this is a predictable outcome of living under totalitarianism. Dreams give us a window into these feelings. Baruch points out that dreams of those who actively resisted are unconflicted. My takeaway is those dreamers sleep better at night. Arendt points out how Gleichschaltung, entrainment, is created by organized guilt and universal responsibility in what she calls political warfare. And at first it is slow. The Third Reich ironically did... Okay, never mind. I encourage you to resist because it's good for your mental health. Social dream may protect sleep, but the images it conjures different from the dreams of neurotics and nightmares in that they are more readily accessible to a wider understanding, as if they are meant to collectively wake us up. Finally, I believe that embedded in this crisis is an opportunity to build a better future, and I hope by thinking together clearly, we can do the hard work of realizing our wish fulfillment dreams. Thank you for your kind attention, and until we meet again, I am wishing you sweet dreams.